Hi, I'm Rob Cowan. I'm the Dalton Municipal Court Judge, and I'm going to take the next few minutes to walk you through your rights, the rights form, and the procedures that we follow to make sure that you understand what you're doing when you come up and speak to me or the solicitor. First thing I want to mention, the rights form. You received one of these when you checked in this morning. It's very important that you take a few minutes to review your rights, make sure that you know what your rights are, so when I ask you if you've had a chance to review that rights form, you can affirmatively say that you had that chance. A couple of rights I want to mention. You have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, we can have you fill out an application. That application is due back in our office by the end of this week. That application is on a needs basis, so we look at your financial situation. It's important that you give us whatever supporting documents you have to support your application if you have any of those documents. You'll learn in the next couple weeks whether or not your application has been approved. So I want to make sure you know that. And so you have a right to hire an attorney if you can afford an attorney. So that's right number one I want to mention. Right number two is that you have a presumption of innocence. The city has the burden of proof to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and you have no burden of proof, so you have a presumption of innocence. That's part of your rights. Third thing I want to mention is you have a right to cross-examine the witnesses that the city will offer. So you can plead not guilty, and we'll have a trial 4 to 6 weeks after you enter your plea, and the city will have to produce evidence, mostly through witnesses, and you have a right to cross-examine those witnesses. So it's important that you know that. You have the right, although you have no obligation, you do have the right to present evidence. And in doing so, if you need our clerks to issue a subpoena for somebody to make sure that they come to court for your court date, give the clerk's office at least 7 days notice, and they'll provide a subpoena for you, and you can have that properly served on the person or hand it to the person if they're not an adversarial witness. So it's important to know that you do have the right, you have the ability to present evidence if you want to, and you have the right to testify if you want to. The city can't force you to testify, but you are allowed to testify if you want to. Even if you don't have an attorney this morning when you enter a plea of not guilty, you can bring an attorney with you to your trial when that day comes. So you have all of those rights. Procedurally, when you checked in, you had a choice between speaking to the solicitor or speaking to me, the judge. That decision is not made in stone. You can change your position in that regard at any time. So if you notice how I'm handling court and you want to change to talk to the solicitor, you're welcome to do so. I may advise you that I think it's better that you talk to the solicitor as well, and vice versa. If you decide after watching court for a little bit that you'd rather speak to me than the solicitor, you can do that too. That's not a problem. We don't get our feelings hurt either way. When you come up and speak to me, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. The first is I'm going to ask you if you've had a chance to review your rights form. Then I'm going to ask you if you have any questions about your rights. If you don't have any questions, I'm going to ask you, are you ready to proceed without an attorney, assuming that you don't have an attorney this morning? Third question, are you waiving your right to a jury trial? Now, this is a right I hadn't talked about yet, but you have a right to have your case sent up to the Superior Court, where the District Attorney's Office will handle the prosecution, and you'll be assigned to one of our 4 Superior Court judges. That right only applies to state law violations, so make sure that you're aware of that. So you do have that right, and I'm going to ask you when you come up, do you want us to handle your matter in this court, or do you want your case handled in Superior Court, where you can get a jury trial and you can plead not guilty and have a jury trial on whatever the state charge is that you're handling or that you're here to deal with today. If you plead guilty, then you are waiving all of the rights that I discussed and all of those other rights, due process rights and otherwise, that are reflected on your rights form. So that's important to know. If you plead nolo contendere is a plea where you are not admitting to the charges against you, but you're not denying them either. In that case too, you are waiving your rights as described on your rights form when you enter that plea, and it's important that you know that. Unlike a guilty or a not guilty plea, a nolo contendere plea gives me a little bit of discretion. Sometimes I can reject the use of the nolo contendere plea, and sometimes it's just not applicable, but that's on a case-by-case basis, and I'll talk to you about that later. So you have that right. You have the right to plea not guilty. Again, we've talked about that. You have a presumption of innocence, and so you preserve all of your rights when you plea not guilty, and the clerk will give you a notice to come back to court for a trial. Our trials typically happen in the afternoon. All right, one last thing. If you're here and you have an immigration status, I don't ask you much about your immigration status. We want you to understand that if you do have an immigration status, it is important for you to speak to someone, an attorney or some expert in immigration, to determine whether or not a guilty plea or a finding of guilt on the charge or charges that you're here to handle today will affect your immigration status. It's very important for you. Otherwise, we've covered all of that. Sit back, relax. We'll get to you as soon as we can, and thank you for your attention.